So here is the next part of our million-part series on hand piecing hexagons, and this last one will connect our last twin unit of our hexagon flower into there. And this is my favorite row to sew because what we're going to do is we're going to sew in, out, and so we can do 4 little edges without breaking our stitch. And one thing when you're hand piecing, to increase your efficiency, you want to try and strategize how to piece your blocks together so you can do as few starts and stops as possible. Because obviously it takes a lot of time and it's kind of annoying to be starting and stopping your breaking thread all the time. So we obviously had to break our thread a lot when we were doing our little twin units, but now that we're putting it all together, we should be able to sew it all in a continuous line without stopping, assuming our thread is long enough. So I've laid it out visually so that I know I do it right and don't make a mistake. Now I'm going to start on this corner, and again I'm going to sew this way. So I'm going to flip this up here. And because I'm sewing here, I put the pin in my destination. So I'm going to put the pin right here. And I'm making sure again that it aligns front and back. So I'm going to put it perfectly through that corner. I'm checking to make sure that I don't catch my center fabric. Right now I'm only sewing my outside edges, and so I don't want my pen to be going through my center fabric or through that seam through the seam of the center fabric or anything, because I want those seams to be nice and open, so they can lay nice and flat. I'm starting 1 stitch in from the edge. And I'm going to check to make sure that more or less lines up on the back. Sometimes it's hard to get this perfect. I'm pulling that through, and then I'm going to do a back stitch, and I'm going to run my needle through the corner. And now I've checked both sides, and I have perfectly caught the corner on both sides. So I'm going to pull that through. And then I do a quick back stitch. I always back stitch on my corners and keeps them nice and sturdy. And then I start my running stitch. And so I'm sewing inwards towards the center of the hexagon flower right now. And I looked it up, or I measured my stitches. I tend to stitch about 5 to 6 stitches per inch. And you may prefer a shorter or longer stitch. I haven't had issues with this stitch length. I wouldn't go longer, but you could certainly go shorter. And some people are really good at sewing tiny, and some people aren't. So you can kind of just, our bodies guide how we sew, and your own instincts and your personality is going to affect how you sew and what's comfortable and fun for you. And if it's comfortable and fun for you to do a tiny stitch, then that's great. The main thing is that you don't want your project to fall apart. And it's not going to fall apart with 5 to 6 stitches per inch, I don't think. If you were going to sew your seams open, you would probably want to do a shorter stitch. So again, I've back stitched at the corner. And now I'm going to twist my project so that my next hexagon, the next side of my hexagon, is now lining up with my centerpiece. So now my centerpiece is right? If you're nervous about whether you're lining it up right, you're certainly welcome to open it back up, see what you're doing, and then say, okay, this piece is going to go here, and then I fold that down. Okay? So then I run my thread through the corner, and I want my corners to match up perfectly. So I'm poking that through the corner, and I'm only catching 2 layers of fabric at a time. When you're at these intersections of 3 pieces, you just want to be careful you're only catching 2 at a time. And now I'm going to run through my centerpiece again, and now I'm sewing into my next hexagon side, checking to make sure that's all nice and open. And I'm just going to run along the edge here, put my pin in. I poked myself. It happens. Anyway, like I said, do what's comfortable for you. With the stitch length and all of this stuff, you'll find you kind of get into your own rhythm. And I think a lot of it's just the physicality of what's comfortable for us, and our personalities kind of mesh with it. And when in doubt, you can always ask, is this going to fall apart? Because a lot of times, a lot of the little decisions are really kind of They don't affect the overall structure of the quilt versus, you know, a stitch length a little bit shorter, a little bit longer. Okay, so I'm at the corner. I do a back stitch at the corner, and I'm going to sew across real quick. Like I said before, I tend to do a back stitch every time I pull my needle through, and that just makes me feel a little more secure. And on these 1.5 inch sides to the hexagons, I tend to do about 2 needles full. And like I said, yeah, 5 to 6 stitches per inch is what I average. Pull my pen out as I'm getting to that edge and match my corners up. So this gets faster the more you do it, and I'll tell you what, if you're not making a video of it, it's even faster. But all this twisting around of my hands, that really is how I sew. Now look, I've run out of thread, so I'm going to go ahead and tie it off here at the corner. I always say it's a false economy to try and sew to the very end of your thread when you have about 2 or 3 inches left. Go ahead and tie off, because you're going to waste a whole bunch of time trying to tie a tiny little knot with a tiny little piece of thread. It just gives yourself a lot of grief. So save yourself some trouble and just tie off while you got a nice long piece. So what I do to tie off is I'll run my needle underneath my previous stitch, my last stitch that I made, and then I pull it through till I have a little loop, and then I poke my needle through that loop and pull it through, and it makes a little knot. If you're a paranoid sort, you can certainly make a couple loops through if you like. And then once I have a nice little knot, I bury my thread by weaving it through the seam allowance just a little bit. And I pull that through. And then you can cut that tail off at the fabric. And then you have a little bit of a thread tail, but a thread tail is buried in the seam allowance, so it's not going to get in my way. So I'll finish this off camera, but you can see when I start a new thread, I'll start in this corner and I'll sew this line and this line until it's all done. So that is I sewed that backwards. Look at that. Isn't that hilarious? I checked and I double checked and I sewed it backwards. So anyway, I'm going to be picking that out. Isn't that cute? Well, that just makes it a very authentic video on how to piece, because I make mistakes like that all the time.